The air in the North Atlantic was a biting mix of salt and ice, a cold that seemed to sink through the layers of heavy wool and leather. Shay Cormac stood on the deck of the Morgan, his eyes fixed on the gray horizon where the sky met the churning dark water. He was a young man with a restless spirit, a member of the Brotherhood who often found himself questioning the methods of his mentors. Beside him stood Liam O'Brien, a man who had been like a brother to him since their youth in the crowded, smoky streets of New York. Liam was a true believer in the creed, but Shay felt a growing discomfort with the secrets they kept and the lives they took in the name of freedom. The air on the ship was filled with the rhythmic creaking of the wooden hull and the snap of the sails in the frigid wind. They were on a mission to recover a stolen artifact from a British naval officer who had ties to the Templars. Shay moved with a practiced grace, his boots sure on the slippery deck. He had been trained to be a shadow, a whisper in the night, but he often felt more like a blunt instrument. He wondered if the peace they sought was worth the blood they spilled. As they approached the enemy vessel, the air was suddenly filled with the roar of cannons and the sharp scent of black powder. Shay led the boarding party, his twin hidden blades sliding into place with a familiar click. The struggle was brief and violent, the air on the enemy deck thick with the smell of iron and the spray of the sea. After the battle, Shay found the artifact, a small, ornate box that seemed to hum with a strange energy. He felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Liam praised his skill, telling him that the mentor, Achilles Davenport, would be pleased with the success. But Shay could not shake the feeling that they were playing with forces they did not understand. They returned to the Davenport homestead, a sanctuary hidden in the lush forests of the colonies. The air there was different, smelling of pine needles, damp earth, and the smoke from the manor's many fireplaces. It was a place of peace, but to Shay, it felt like a gilded cage where questions were met with silence or stern reminders of the creed. He met with Achilles in the large library, a room filled with the scent of old paper and beeswax. Achilles was a man of great gravity, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of decades of leadership. He told Shay that the box was a key to finding ancient sites left behind by those who came before. These sites, Achilles believed, held the power to ensure the freedom of all humanity. Shay looked at the graying man and saw a leader who was willing to risk everything for a vision of the future. The air in the library was still and heavy. Shay asked what would happen if the power was too great to control, but Achilles only told him that faith in the Brotherhood was the only answer. To unlock the secrets of the box, Shay was sent to find a man named Benjamin Franklin in the city of Albany. The journey took him through the frontier, where the air was crisp and filled with the sound of rushing rivers and the calls of hidden birds. He moved through the trees like a ghost, a skill he had perfected over years of training. He found Franklin in a small workshop, the air inside smelling of ozone, oil, and charcoal. Franklin was a man of endless curiosity, fascinated by the strange box and the energy it produced. He agreed to help Shay, using his experiments with lightning to provide the spark needed to activate the device. The experiment took place during a summer storm. The air was thick with humidity and the static of the coming rain. As the lightning struck the rods Franklin had placed on the roof, the box glowed with a brilliant, terrifying light. It projected a map of the world, highlighting several points deep within the earth. Shay watched as the light flickered over the stone walls of the workshop, feeling a deep sense of dread. One of the locations was in Lisbon, Portugal. Achilles immediately ordered Shay to travel there and recover the piece of Eden hidden beneath the city. The air in the workshop was heavy with the smell of burnt copper as the light faded, leaving Shay in a darkness that felt more profound than before. The journey to Lisbon was long, and the air on the Atlantic grew warmer as they sailed south. Shay spent his time on the Morrigan, practicing his marksmanship, the sharp crack of his air rifle echoing over the waves. He felt a strange detachment from his fellow assassins. He saw them as men who were so focused on their goals that they ignored the world around them. He thought of his home in New York and the simple life he might have had if he hadn't been recruited into this secret war. The air on the deck was soft and smelled of the open ocean, a contrast to the cold mission that lay ahead of him. He arrived in Lisbon on a beautiful, clear day in November. The city was a place of white stone and red-tiled roofs, the air smelling of fresh bread, grilled fish, and the incense from the many cathedrals. It was a day of celebration, and the streets were crowded with people in their finest clothes. Shay felt out of place in his dark robes, a shadow moving through a world of light. He made his way to the great cathedral, the air inside cool and smelling of old stone and guttering candles. He found the secret entrance beneath the altar, leading down into a chamber that had not been opened in centuries. Deep beneath the earth, the air was cold and thin. Shay found the artifact resting on a stone pedestal. It was a glowing shard of light, beautiful and alien. As he reached out to take it, the ground began to tremble. He realized, too late, that the artifact was not a weapon to be taken, but a focal point that held the very earth together. As the shard shattered in his hand, a massive earthquake began to tear the city apart. The air was suddenly filled with the roar of collapsing stone and the screams of thousands of people. Shay scrambled back toward the surface, the world around him falling into ruin. He emerged from the cathedral to find Lisbon in flames. The air was thick with white dust and the smell of smoke. Buildings were crumbling into the streets, and the ground was opening up in jagged fissures. Shay ran through the chaos, his heart heavy with a guilt that felt like a physical weight. He saw the destruction his actions had caused, the lives lost in an instant because of the orders of the Brotherhood. He reached the harbor and saw the Morrigan waiting, the air over the water filled with the black soot of the burning city. He realized then that the assassins were not the protectors of humanity, but a danger to it. His path was changed forever in the ruins of Lisbon. Shay returned to the colonies with a heart that felt like a cold stone in his chest. The air at the Davenport homestead was unusually still, the scent of blooming wildflowers clashing with the dark memories of the dust and ash in Lisbon. He walked through the forest, his boots heavy on the soft earth. He did not see the beauty of the trees or the peaceful flow of the river. He only saw the faces of the people who had perished when the ground opened up. He reached the manor and found Achilles in the library, the room filled with the familiar smell of old paper and wood smoke. Shay did not wait for a greeting. He spoke with a voice that trembled with rage, describing the horror he had witnessed. He told Achilles that the artifacts were not meant to be found, and that the Brotherhood was causing the very suffering they claimed to prevent. Achilles looked at Shay with a cold, unwavering gaze. He did not offer comfort or regret. He spoke of the greater good and the necessity of sacrifice in the pursuit of a free world. He told Shay that the Templars would surely use the same power for evil if the assassins did not secure it first. The air in the library grew hot and suffocating. Shay realized then that his mentor was blinded by his own goals. He saw that the Brotherhood followed their creed with a loyalty that had become dangerous. He knew he could not allow Achilles to send another assassin to another city to repeat the tragedy of Lisbon. He decided to take the manuscript, the key to the remaining sites, and ensure that no one could ever use it again. He waited until the moon was high and the air was crisp with the coming night. He moved through the manor like the shadow he had been trained to be, his breath shallow in the silence. He found the manuscript in the hidden vault, the air inside smelling of dry ink and ancient secrets. As he tucked the book into his tunic, he felt a momentary flicker of grief for the life he was leaving behind. But as he turned to leave, the floorboards groaned. Liam was standing in the doorway, his face a mixture of confusion and hurt. The air between the two friends was thick with a tension that felt like a physical barrier. Liam asked him what he was doing, his voice a low whisper that echoed in the dark hallway. Shay tried to explain, telling Liam that he was doing this to save them all. But Liam only saw a betrayal of the Brotherhood. The silence was broken by the sound of more footsteps. Achilles and the other assassins emerged from the shadows, their eyes hard and their blades ready. The air was suddenly filled with the scent of oil and steel. Shay realized he was trapped in the home that had raised him. He jumped from the balcony into the dark trees below, the air whistling past his ears as he tumbled through the branches. He ran toward the cliffs that overlooked the Atlantic, the sound of his pursuers close behind him. The air was cold and smelled of salt as he reached the edge of the world. He stood on the precipice, the waves crashing against the rocks far below. The air was wild with the wind of the North Sea. He turned to face his brothers, his hands raised in a final plea for them to understand. He told them that the manuscript was a curse, not a gift. But a shot rang out, the sound echoing across the water. Shay felt a searing pain in his shoulder, and the force of the lead pushed him back. He felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. As he fell into the dark, freezing water, the air left his lungs in a single gasp. He hit the surface, and everything went black, the manuscript still gripped in his hand as he sank into the depths. He did not die in the water. He was found by an elderly couple, the Finnegans, who lived in a small house on the outskirts of New York. The air in their home was warm and smelled of stew and medicinal salves. They nursed him back to health over many weeks, unaware of the war he had been fighting. Shay woke up to a world that felt different. The air in the city was thick with the smell of coal smoke, horse manure, and the salty breeze from the harbor. He walked the streets with a limp, his body still healing from the fall. He saw the city with new eyes, noticing the way the common people lived their lives without any knowledge of the assassins or the Templars. He felt a strange sense of peace in the anonymity of the crowd. As his strength returned, Shay began to notice the influence of the gangs that plagued the city. These were groups supported by the assassins to keep the British authorities off balance. The air in the poorer districts was heavy with the smell of rot and the fear of the people who were being extorted and harassed. Shay saw the banner of the Brotherhood flying over the gang hideouts, and he felt a deep disgust. He realized that the assassins were using the city as a playground for their war, regardless of the cost to the residents. He decided that he could no longer stand by and watch his former brothers destroy the peace of his home. He encountered a man named Colonel George Monroe, a British officer who was working to bring order to the city. Monroe was a man of integrity, his voice steady and his eyes focused. The air around him was one of discipline and purpose. He spoke to Shay about the need to protect the people from the chaos of the gangs. He did not know Shay was an assassin, but he saw a man with skills that could be put to good use. Shay found himself drawn to the clarity of Monroe's mission. The air in the military camp was clean and organized, a stark contrast to the secrets of the homestead. Shay realized that the order the British and the Templars sought was exactly what the world needed to prevent the madness he had seen in Lisbon. Shay began to work with Monroe, using his knowledge of the city's underground to dismantle the gang hideouts. The air during these raids was filled with the sound of shouting and the smell of gunpowder. He moved through the buildings with a new kind of purpose, not as a shadow, but as a protector. He saw the relief on the faces of the shopkeepers and families when the gangs were driven out. He felt a sense of fulfillment he had never found in the Brotherhood. He was no longer fighting for an abstract idea of freedom. He was fighting for the actual safety of his neighbors. The air in the city began to feel lighter as the grip of the gangs was slowly loosened. During one of these missions, he came face to face with a former associate from the Brotherhood. The air turned cold as the two men recognized each other. The assassin called him a traitor, but Shay only saw a man blinded by a dangerous creed. He realized that he could no longer just hide from his past. He had to hunt down those who would use the ancient power to destroy the world. He was no longer an assassin, and he was not yet a Templar. He was a man caught between two worlds, the air around him charged with the weight of the war to come. He looked at the manuscript he had hidden away and knew that the hunt had only just begun. The transition from being a hunted man to a hunter began in the quiet, wood-paneled rooms of the British military headquarters. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and tobacco, a world of structure and rules that Shay found strangely comforting. Colonel Monroe had introduced him to a man of great presence, Grand Master Hatham Kenway. Hatham was a man who moved with a calm, predatory grace, his voice as sharp and clear as the winter air. He did not ask Shay for blind faith, he asked for results. He spoke of a world where people could walk the streets without fear because a steady hand was at the wheel. The air in the room felt still as Shay took the oath, the weight of the Templar ring on his finger feeling solid and real. He was no longer a shadow in the service of a dangerous dream. He was an instrument of order. His first task as a Templar was to secure the city of New York once and for all. The air in the lower districts was still heavy with the scent of coal smoke and the lingering rot of the gang territories. The assassins had fortified a large manor on the outskirts of the city, using it as a hub for their operations. Shay led a group of British soldiers through the narrow streets, the rhythmic clatter of their boots on the cobblestones, a sign of the changing tide. He felt a cold resolve as they approached the gates. He knew the layout of the manor perfectly, having visited it many times as a younger man. The air was filled with the sudden, sharp crack of musketry as the guards opened fire, the smell of black powder quickly masking the salty breeze from the harbor. Inside the manor, Shay moved with a lethal efficiency. He was no longer hesitant or filled with questions. He saw the assassins as men who would burn down a city to prove a point, and he treated them as such. The air in the hallways was filled with the sound of clashing steel and the heavy breathing of men in combat. He found the leader of the local cell, a man who had once taught him how to blend into a crowd. The struggle was brief. As Shay stood over his former teacher, the air felt quiet and cold. He realized that the Brotherhood he had once loved was a collection of individuals who were too focused on their own power to see the destruction they caused. He took the documents they had been protecting, his heart as steady as the stone walls around him. The documents revealed a new plot by the assassins to find another ancient site, this time in the frozen reaches of the north. The air in Hatham's office was cool as they studied the maps. Hatham told Shay that he was the best man for the hunt, as he knew the Brotherhood's secrets better than anyone. Shay felt a sense of pride. He was being treated as an equal, a partner in a grand mission to protect the world. He returned to the Morrigan, the air on the docks smelling of pine and wet wood. He oversaw the installation of new, more powerful cannons and a reinforced icebreaker on the bow. The ship was ready to face the ice and the men who hid behind it. The journey north was a slow one, the air turning into a frigid mist that coated the rigging in white frost. Shay spent his nights in the captain's cabin, the air smelling of oil from the lamp and the old paper of the manuscript. He studied the notes Liam had written, feeling a pang of sadness that his old friend was still on the wrong side of the war. He knew that eventually they would have to face each other. The Morrigan pushed through the floating sheets of ice, the sound of the grinding frozen water a constant roar in the silence of the Arctic. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but Shay found a strange clarity in the harshness of the environment. They reached a small, rocky island where the assassins were rumored to have established a base. The air was filled with the smell of seal oil and wood smoke. Shay led a small team ashore, their boots crunching on the snow-covered rocks. They found a series of tents and a small wooden shack, protected by a group of men in dark robes. The air was silent until the first arrow hissed through the wind. Shay used his air rifle with a practiced hand, the silent weapon taking down the lookouts before they could raise an alarm. He moved through the camp with the same silence he had learned at the homestead. But now it was used for a different purpose. Among the prisoners they took was a young recruit who reminded Shay of his younger self. The boy was terrified, his breath coming in quick white puffs in the freezing air. Shay sat with him, his voice calm and steady. He didn't threaten the boy, he told him the truth about Lisbon. He spoke of the earthquake and the screams of the innocent. The air in the small tent was quiet as the recruit listened. Shay saw the realization dawning in the boy's eyes, the same realization he had felt in the ruins of the cathedral. He realized that the greatest weapon the Templars had was not the sword, but the truth. He let the boy go, telling him to find a life away from the secret wars. As they prepared to leave the island, a familiar ship appeared on the horizon. It was the ship Liam often used, its dark sails a stark contrast to the white ice. The air on the Morrigan became electric with anticipation. Shay took the wheel, his eyes fixed on the approaching vessel. He didn't want to kill Liam, but he knew he couldn't let him continue the search for the sights. The two ships danced among the icebergs, the air filled with the roar of the cannons and the splintering of wood. The Morrigan's new icebreaker allowed her to move where the other ship could not, giving Shay the advantage. The battle ended when a massive iceberg collapsed, sending a wall of water and ice toward both ships. The air was filled with a terrifying roar. Shay managed to steer the Morrigan clear, but Liam's ship was forced toward the rocky shore. Shay watched through his glass as the vessel hit the rocks, its mast snapping like a twig. The air was suddenly silent again, the only sound the lapping of the cold water against the hull. He wanted to go ashore and search for his friend, but the ice was closing in. He had to turn back toward the south, leaving the mystery of Liam's fate to the snow and the wind. Returning to New York, Shay felt a deeper sense of commitment to the Templar cause. He saw that the war was not just about control, but about preventing a global catastrophe. The air in the city felt warmer, and the streets seemed safer. He met with Haytham and Colonel Monroe, the three men standing together as the sun set over the harbor. They were the architects of a new order, and Shay was their most effective tool. He looked at the manuscript in his hand and knew that the next phase of the hunt would take him even further into the heart of the Brotherhood. The air was fresh and full of the scent of the sea, a promise of the work still to be done. The hunt moved from the crowded streets of the colonies back to the open, frigid waters of the North Atlantic. The air was a sharp, biting cold that felt like needles against the skin, smelling of frozen salt and the deep, old ice of the glaciers. Shay stood at the helm of the Morrigan, his hands steady on the wheel even as the deck tilted beneath him. He had been given a list of names, men and women he had once called friends, now targets in a war for the safety of the world. The first was Le Chasseur, a fierce French operative who managed the assassins' supply lines. The air on the ship was filled with the sound of the crew preparing the cannons, the metallic clink of shot, and the rustle of heavy rope. They tracked Le Chasseur to a fortified coastal outpost where the cliffs rose like black teeth from the foaming sea. The air was thick with a gray, freezing fog that hid the Morrigan until they were nearly upon the docks. Shay led the charge, his movement swift and purposeful. He no longer felt the hesitation that had once plagued him at the homestead. The smell of burning pitch and wet wood filled the air as the battle began. Le Chasseur was a man of immense strength, and their duel was a brutal exchange of steel and grit. When the Frenchman finally fell, the air in the small stone fort grew quiet. He looked at Shay with a bloody grin, telling him that the Brotherhood would never stop. Shay simply closed the man's eyes, feeling only a cold necessity. With the supply lines broken, Shay turned his attention to the frontier. He needed to find the man responsible for the chemical weapons the assassins were developing to use against the British authorities. This led him to a hidden valley where the air was heavy with the scent of pine and something sharp and bitter. He found a secret laboratory hidden within a series of caves, the air inside damp and smelling of sulfur and charcoal. He watched from the shadows as the recruits filled glass jars with a deadly gas. He realized that the Brotherhood was willing to poison the very air of the cities to achieve their goals. He moved through the cave, sabotaging the equipment and ensuring the gas would never reach New York. The sabotage caused a series of small explosions that echoed through the valley like thunder. The air was filled with the sound of falling rock and the panicked shouts of the guards. Shay emerged from the caves into the cool night air, the moon reflecting off the snow-covered peaks. He met with Haytham Kenway at a nearby outpost to report his success. Haytham was pleased, his eyes glinting with a cold approval. The air in the outpost was warm from a large central fire, smelling of roasted meat and the leather of the soldiers' gear. Haytham spoke of the importance of these victories, telling Shay that every assassin removed was a life saved in the future. Shay nodded, the weight of the Templar ring on his finger, a constant reminder of his new path. The next name on his list was Kesagawas, a fierce warrior who had trained Shay in the ways of the forest. The hunt took them back to the area around Albany, where the air was crisp and filled with the colors of late autumn. The forest was a maze of red and gold leaves, the ground soft with the smell of damp earth and decaying wood. Shay felt a pang of regret as he tracked his former teacher. Kesagawas was a master of the environment, and the air was often filled with the sudden whistle of an arrow or the rustle of a branch that moved against the wind. It was a game of cat and mouse played across miles of rugged terrain, a test of everything Shay had been taught. The final confrontation happened during a siege on a British fort. The air was filled with the roar of heavy mortars and the screams of the wounded. Shay climbed the outer walls, his breath coming in quick white puffs. He found Kesagawas on the ramparts, a torch in his hand as he prepared to ignite the powder magazine. The air was hot and smelled of saltpeter. The two men fought with a familiarity that was heartbreaking, each knowing the other's moves before they were made. Shay was faster, his hidden blade finding the mark before the torch could fall. As Kesagawas lay dying, he told Shay that Achilles would never stop searching for the precursor sites. The air was thick with the smoke of the burning fort as Shay walked away. Returning to the Morrigan, Shay felt the toll of the hunt. The air in his cabin was quiet, the only sound the scratching of his pen as he updated the list of targets. He thought of Liam and the others who were still out there. He knew that the mission would eventually lead him back to the homestead, back to the place where it all began. He spent hours studying the maps of the North Atlantic, the air smelling of the old paper and the oil from his lamp. He saw the patterns of the assassins' movements, their desperation growing as their leaders fell one by one. He was the wolf in their midst, and he would not stop until the threat was eliminated. Adewale, the legendary assassin and former quartermaster of Edward Kenway, was also in the area, helping the Brotherhood. The air on the sea became even more dangerous as the two veteran sailors clashed. Adewale's ship, the Experto Creed, was a powerful vessel, and the naval battles between them were legendary. The air was a blur of sea spray and iron as the ships circled each other among the icebergs. Shay respected Adewale, but he saw him as a man clinging to an outdated and dangerous dream. The air was filled with the sound of the heavy broadsides, the very earth seeming to shake with the force of the cannons. The hunt for Adewale led them to the shores of Ville Carriere. The air was humid and smelled of tropical salt, a stark contrast to the frozen north. Shay tracked the old assassin to a small village, the air filled with the sound of the waves and the rustle of palm fronds. The duel was a clash of two different eras of the Brotherhood. Adewale fought with a raw, powerful energy, his voice booming as he accused Shay of betraying his heritage. Shay remained silent, his movements efficient and cold. When the battle was over, the air was still. Shay felt no joy in the victory, only a grim satisfaction that another piece of the puzzle had been removed. As he sailed back toward the North Atlantic, the air grew cold once more. He looked at the horizon and saw the faint glow of the northern lights. He knew that the final stage of the war was approaching. The assassins were retreating to their most secret strongholds, and the air was thick with the tension of the coming end. Shay took the wheel of the Morrigan, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He was no longer the boy who had questioned the creed. He was the man who had seen the world break and was determined to hold it together. The air was fresh and full of the scent of the sea, carrying him toward the final confrontation. The hunt for the last of the Brotherhood led Shay back to the frozen edges of the world, where the air was so cold it felt like glass in the lungs. The sky was a bruised purple, and the northern lights danced overhead, casting a ghostly green glow on the vast sheets of ice. Shay stood on the bow of the Morrigan, the air smelling of ancient snow and the deep, dark water of the Arctic. He knew that Liam and Achilles were close. They were searching for the final precursor site, the one that could trigger another catastrophe if they tried to remove the artifact. The air was filled with the rhythmic grinding of the Morrigan's icebreaker as it forced a path through the frozen sea, a sound like mountains crumbling in the distance. They reached a jagged coastline where a great temple was hidden beneath a glacier. The air was silent and still, the kind of quiet that precedes a great storm. Shay led a small team of Templars toward the entrance, their boots crunching on the pristine snow. He saw the tracks of the assassins ahead of them, a trail that led into the heart of the ice. The air near the temple entrance was thick with the scent of ozone and something metallic, a sign of the ancient technology humming within. Shay felt a familiar dread settling in his stomach. He remembered Lisbon and the way the world had fallen apart, and he vowed that he would not let it happen again. Inside the temple, the air was warmer, but carried a strange, static charge that made the hair on Shay's arms stand up. The walls were made of a smooth, dark stone that seemed to pulse with a faint light. He found Liam and Achilles standing before a central pedestal, their faces illuminated by the glow of a precursor artifact. The air in the chamber was heavy with the weight of thousands of years. Liam looked at Shay with a look of desperation, his hand hovering near the artifact. Shay called out to them, his voice echoing in the vast space. He begged them to stop, explaining that the artifacts were not meant to be taken, but were the pillars holding the world in place. Achilles remained silent, his eyes fixed on the power before him, but Liam was filled with a bitter anger. He accused Shay of being a coward and a traitor to the cause of freedom. The air was suddenly filled with the sound of a struggle as the Templars and the remaining assassins clashed in the corridors of the temple. In the chaos, Liam made a move for the artifact. Shay lunged forward to stop him, but the ground began to tremble. The air was filled with a low, deep hum that vibrated through the very bones of the earth. As the artifact was disturbed, the stone floor began to crack, and the light in the room flared into a blinding white. The temple began to collapse as the earthquake intensified. The air was filled with the roar of falling ice and the scream of twisting metal. Shay and Liam were separated from the others, falling through a fissure into the lower levels of the site. They found themselves in a narrow ice tunnel, the air thick with white dust. Despite the world falling down around them, Liam drew his blade. The two men fought with a tragic intensity, their movements a blur of steel and shadow. The air was cold and filled with the sound of their heavy breathing. They were brothers who had been torn apart by a difference in belief, and now they were fighting for survival in a dying temple. The duel led them out onto the edge of a frozen cliff, the air wild with the wind of the storm. Liam slipped on a patch of ice, and as he fell, he grabbed Shay's collar. They both tumbled over the edge, sliding down the steep slope of the glacier. Shay managed to catch himself on a rocky outcrop, but Liam fell further, landing hard on the ice below. The air was silent as Shay climbed down to reach his friend. Liam lay broken in the snow, the manuscript held loosely in his hand. He looked up at Shay, his eyes clear for a moment, and told him that maybe he had been right about the danger. As the life left Liam's eyes, the air felt empty and cold. Shay returned to the surface, the air thick with the smoke and steam of the collapsing temple. He found Haytham Kenway standing over a wounded Achilles. Haytham had his pistol drawn, ready to end the life of the last mentor of the colonial assassins. The air was tense. Shay stepped between them, his hand on Haytham's arm. He argued that Achilles should be spared so that he could tell the rest of the Brotherhood about the danger of the sites. He wanted Achilles to live with the knowledge of his failure. Haytham hesitated, the air in the frozen wasteland silent as he weighed the decision. Finally, he lowered his weapon, but not before shooting Achilles in the leg to ensure he would never walk easily again. They left the Arctic as the temple finally sank back into the ice. The air on the Morrigan was quiet as they sailed south, the mission complete, but the cost immeasurable. Shay had lost his friends and his home, and he had become the very thing he once hunted. He looked at the manuscript, the pages damp and worn, and knew that his work as a Templar was only beginning. He had saved the world from a great disaster, but he had done so at the price of his own soul. The air on the deck was fresh and salty, a reminder of the vastness of the world he was now sworn to protect through order and control. Returning to New York, the air was crisp with the start of a new winter. The city felt stable and secure under the watch of the Templars. Shay met with Haytham in the ruins of the old homestead, the air smelling of cold stone and dead leaves. Haytham told him that there was another manuscript, one that had been taken to Europe by an assassin years before. Shay knew that his hunt would take him far from the colonies, across the ocean to the streets of Paris. He felt a quiet resolve. He was the hunter now, the one who moved in the shadows to preserve the light of order. He stood on the docks, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. The air was full of the scent of the sea, the same air he had breathed as a young assassin dreaming of freedom. He looked at the Templar ring on his finger and knew that he had found his true purpose. He would find the remaining journals and the remaining assassins, no matter where they hid. The air was clear and the wind was at his back. Shay Cormac, the man who had seen the world break, was ready to do whatever was necessary to keep it whole. The transition from the wild, frozen frontiers of the North Atlantic to the refined, crowded streets of Paris was a shift in the very nature of the air Shay breathed. In the colonies, the air had been vast and smelled of pine and salt. In Paris, it was dense with the scent of perfume, baking bread, and the underlying dampness of the Seine River. Shay arrived in the city during a time of great elegance and underlying tension. The year was 1776, and while the American colonies were in the middle of a revolution, Paris was a city of gold and marble that felt as though it were holding its breath. Shay moved through the streets not as a sailor or a warrior, but as a sophisticated traveler, his Templar ring hidden beneath a fine silk glove. His mission was clear. He had to track down Charles Dorian, an assassin who held the precursor box that had caused so much destruction in Lisbon and the north. The air in the gardens of Versailles, where the elite of France gathered, was sweet with the smell of manicured roses and expensive wine. Shay watched from the shadows of the tall hedges, his eyes scanning the crowd for the man who carried the secret that could break the world. He felt a cold focus. He was no longer the conflicted young man from the Davenport homestead. He was a master of the hunt, a man who had seen the cost of the assassin's curiosity and was determined to end it once and for all. The pursuit led him into the heart of the palace during a grand masquerade ball. The air inside the hall was hot from thousands of candles and heavy with the smell of powdered wigs and sweat. Shay wore a mask of silver, blending into the sea of silk and velvet. He spotted Charles Dorian moving through the crowd, a man who looked comfortable in this world of secrets. Shay followed him into a quiet side gallery, the air there cooler and smelling of old oil paintings and floor wax. There was no long speech and no hesitation. Shay moved with the efficiency he had perfected over a decade of hunting. The struggle was over in a matter of seconds, the air in the gallery remaining silent as Dorian fell to the floor. As Dorian lay dying, he looked at Shay and spoke of the revolution that was coming, claiming that the Templars would never truly control the spirit of the people. Shay did not argue. He reached into the man's coat and retrieved the box, the ancient wood feeling familiar and heavy in his hand. The air in the room felt still, as if the ghosts of his past, Liam, Adewale, and Kesagawas, were watching him in that final moment. He had completed the task that had started in the ruins of Lisbon. He stood over the fallen assassin and spoke the words of the order he now served, a promise of peace through stability and control. Shay walked out of the palace and into the cool night air of the Parisian streets. He could hear the distant sound of a clock striking the hour. He looked at the box and then at the city around him. He knew that while his hunt for the colonial assassins was over, the war between the two orders would continue across every continent and through every century. The air was crisp and smelled of the coming winter. He felt a deep sense of closure. He had stopped the Brotherhood from triggering another catastrophe, and he had secured the future of the Templar Order in the New World and the Old. He made his way toward the docks, where a ship was waiting to take him back across the Atlantic. The air on the river was foggy and smelled of wet stone and tar. He thought of the young boy he had seen in the palace, the son of the man he had just killed, and he wondered what kind of world that child would grow up in. He hoped it would be a world of order, shaped by the steady hand of the Templars. He boarded the vessel, the air on the water feeling fresh and open. Shay Cormac, the man who had turned his back on the creed to save the world from itself, stood on the deck and watched the lights of Paris fade into the mist. The journals he had recovered and the box he now held were the final pieces of a story that had spanned oceans and lifetimes. The air of the sea was his home, and as the ship turned toward the west, he felt a quiet peace. He had been a traitor, a rogue, and a killer, but in his own heart, he knew he had been a protector. He would return to the colonies to stand beside Haytham Kenway, continuing the work of maintaining the peace they had fought so hard to establish. The wind was strong and the stars were bright, guiding him toward the horizon and the next chapter of the secret war. The story of the rogue was one of a man who had the courage to see the flaws in his own belief and the strength to change his path. The heir of history would remember him in different ways, some as a villain and some as a hero. But for Shay, the only thing that mattered was that the ground stayed firm beneath the feet of the innocent. He closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the waves, the same sound he had heard since he was a boy in New York. The journey was complete, and the light of the morning was finally breaking over the edge of the world.